So what I want to do during my 4 minutes and 30 seconds left is to try to connect the findings of this paper, which is a great paper. It's very interesting. It's very well made. I think the topic is fantastic. To a recent paper of mine I wrote on the App Store, the Apple App Store, and some of the antitrust problems that it generates. And the first point I wanted to make is that I think there's clearly, as pointed out in the paper, a link between the existence of platform competition and exclusives. If you think at the App Store, for instance, but it's also true of the Play Store, there are very few exclusive agreements. And I think it's because there's no competition between the App Store and the Play Store. The App Store is the only way to reach iOS users, and the Play Store is pretty much the only way to reach Android users. So there's very little, if any, competition between them. And this is why I believe that these two app stores cannot really attract exclusive deals or have no incentives to do so unless, the exclusive could be so attractive that it could, shift or convince iOS users to ditch their iPhone to move to an Android phone, for example, or vice versa. But I don't think it's really realistic. The second point I wanted to make is that signing an exclusive deals may not always be a reasonable proposition for superstar, superstar companies. I think it's perfectly possible for a movie star producer or a leading singer to sign an exclusive deal with Netflix or Spotify. There's, of course, a trade-off, but, if the deal is highly lucrative, they might wish to sign it. Now, I think it's really not an option when the superstar firm also benefits from network effects. So, for example, let's take Tinder, which is a superstar app, right, or superstar product in the sense that it has a lot of users and it's one of the most popular apps on the App Store. Well, it would be really foolish for Tinder to sign an exclusive deal with iOS, because obviously, its users would be very frustrated to be limited to iOS users only. I mean, obviously, for Tinder, like for many other, dating apps or apps that for which network effects are critical, you want to be on both platforms. Now, the third point I wanted to make, and it's a related point, is that in some instances, you can be a superstar and yet have zero bargaining power. And once again, let's take the example of Tinder. I mean, Tinder is a superstar app. It's one of the most downloaded apps on both the App Store and the Play Store. And yet, it has to pay a 30% commission to the App Store. And on top of that, it has to accept that all in-app payments will be made using the Apple IAP, which is Apple's in-app payment solution. And I think the reason why it is like that, it's once again because there's no competition between the App Store and the Play Store. Tinder needs to be on the App Store. The App Store can probably do without Tinder, but Tinder cannot do without the App Store. So in that case, although you may be a superstar product, you would have zero bargaining power, and you will have to accept basically the trading conditions imposed by the platform.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much, Damien, for the introduction, which is very useful for introducing what is the purpose of this paper. This is a work that is jointly with Elias Caroni from the University of Bologna and Shiva Shekhar from Compass Lexicon. And as you were introducing, this is a paper on platforms, superstars, exclusive contracts, and also vertical integration. So I will start with the presentation right now, if it is okay.
Please.
Perfect. Okay. So the motivation is that in platform market, we know that platforms allow interactions between a different group of agents, buyers and sellers, listeners and artists, streamers and viewers. And the typical point here, as you were introducing, is that not all agents are equal. There are some agents that are atomistic. Most of the agents are atomistic. But there are also some agents that are more important than others. They can be very attractive. They can have devoted followers. And these agents are superstars. To give you some very quick example, you can imagine the music market where you have competition. And here there is competition and also quite intense competition between Spotify and Apple Music. And there is a long tail of indie artists, but then you have superstars like Beyoncé. In the esport market where there was competition between Twitch and Mixer, now Mixer has been shut down, there is a long tail of amateur streamers, and there was Ninja that struck a very remunerative exclusive deal last year with Mixer, and now it's moving recent news to YouTube. There is you can look at the same situation in the video gaming industry, podcasts, also traditional shopping malls, and here you have heterogeneity. And because superstars can be very attractive, if there is competition, they also have bargaining power vis-a-vis the platforms, and therefore they can opt for exclusive or non-exclusive contract. And the trade-off here is between exclusivity. Being exclusive means that you can capitalize on the fact that there is scarcity in the market, and therefore you can sign a very remunerative deal. And the other side of the coin is that a non-exclusive contract will allow you to reach a very large customer audience. In the case of Tinder, you would like to be on Apple, on the Apple App Store and on Google Play, simply because you would like to have interactions with all the possible users. And the questions that we try to answer with this paper are the following. In market in which you have network externalities, you would like to know whether and why superstars sign exclusive contracts, and also what are the welfare effects of these exclusive contracts. In particular, we would like to know whether exclusive contracts are bad or good, who are the winners and losers from these exclusive contracts, and whether there are some anti-competitive effects. And the third point that we try to deal with is whether exclusivity arises more often when you have a vertical integration, namely when you have a platform that is also owning the superstar. So what are the key contributions here? I will provide you a very brief introduction of the results, and then I will explain the mechanism. So the mechanism are as follows, and the results are as follows. When there is exclusivity, the superstar will be able to agglomerate some users and some firms. The firms in this case can be content providers, can also be streamers, can be developers of application. As a consequence of this, there will be more entry in the market, and this creates some surplus such that exclusive contract in some cases can be welfare enhancing. And in particular, the mechanism will be as follows. An exclusive contract will make some consumer to move from one platform to another. This switch behavior will trigger more entry in the market, and more firms, more developers, more artists will be present exclusively on the platform that is signing the exclusive deal. When this happens, when the competition in the market is sufficiently intense. The reason is that if the market competition is sufficiently intense, more consumers will move, the consumers will be very mobile, more firms will enter the market, the surplus to be extracted will be very large, and therefore the superstar will prefer an exclusive contract. If this is not the case, the superstar will prefer not to sign an exclusive contract and reach as many consumers as possible. And with the welfare implication is the welfare implications are such that firms will always prefer the exclusive contract between the platform and the superstar. And in some cases, if the network effects are very large, if consumer benefits a lot from the presence of firms on the other side of the market, which imply benefiting from the presence of streamers, apps, and shops, then in this case, also the consumer surplus will be higher under exclusivity. And finally, we also showed that if there is vertical integration, this possible vertical merger between the platform and the superstar, then the likelihood of exclusivity will be reduced. Now, let me say a few things about the modeling strategy here. We consider, for simplicity, but we relax this assumption later on, a case in which you have two ex-ante symmetric platforms, and there is differentiation a la Hoteling, such that some consumers prefer platform 1 to platform 2, other things equal, and some other consumers prefer platform 2 to platform 1, other things equal. The platforms allow these consumers to interact with two types of firms, the superstar, so B on C, for instance, and the fringe firms. These are the amateurish artists. This can be the same also for app developers and superstar apps like Tinder. And we will assume for simplicity that the superstar has all bargaining power vis-a-vis the platform, so it can make a take it or leave it offer. Only consumers will be charged, and the consumers are single homing, and there will be no price for the fringe firms. The market will be fully covered. So let me introduce what are the agents here. So we have this fringe of small firms. This can be, again, the amateur streamers. This can be the artists. And they are heterogeneous. Every time that they join a platform, they face a cost, an entry cost. And therefore, they will join a platform if once they bear this entry cost, K, for entering a specific platform, then they will meet enough consumer on that platform, where the I is the number of consumers patronizing that platform, and gamma is instead how much they gain from the presence of these consumers. The consumers instead prefer one platform or the other, and when they join a platform, they like the superstar if the superstar is present, and they gain this phi here, but they also like a large catalog, and therefore, or a large app store, a large network of streamers, for instance, and therefore there will be network externalities such that for each firm, for each artist, they will have a theta parameter. They will get theta as a network externality. They will pay a price, and there will be some preference mismatch because some consumers prefer one platform to another. You might prefer Apple to Google or vice versa. Now, the superstar is a particular type of content provider or firm and can make a take it or leave it offer to the platform. We will assume that if there is exclusivity, such an exclusivity arises with platform 1. So the platform, if the superstar is exclusive on platform 1, the superstar will collect a fixed tariff exclusive contract fee from the platform, but at the same time, the superstar will prefer to have interactions with the consumer that can meet on that platform. While instead, if there is non-exclusivity, the superstar will collect the non-exclusive contract fee here, but at the same time, it will enjoy interactions with the entire market. The platforms, we will assume that the platforms are charging only the consumers, and they will pay a price, the tariff to the superstar if the superstar is exclusive or is present or not. Now, let's explain now what is the mechanism here. So we've said that the platforms are ex-ante symmetric. Now, if there is a non-exclusive contract, for the perspective of the users, nothing will change because they will find a superstar on each single platform. And therefore, the market will be equally split. Some content providers, some firms will become active in the market, and they will prefer to join both platforms. And these are the content providers, the firms that have sufficiently low entry costs. All the others that you can consider the high cost firms or the most inefficient firms will stay out of the market. What happens if there is exclusivity? Now, suppose that the superstar is only on platform 1. Platform 1 will become more attractive, and this will imply that more consumers will move from platform 2 to platform 1. As a consequence of this, there will be aggregation of consumers on platform 1. More firms overall will be active in the market because some firms that previously were not joining the market. Now they prefer to join the market because they can find more than half of the consumers on one platform. And in particular, these additional firms, they will agglomerate on platform one, such that some very, very low cost firms will continue to multi-home, but this will be there will be fewer firms multi-homing than before, but many others will single home. And this is a very important result because it shows that an exclusive contract can generate more surplus, can generate aggregation, and more importantly, an exclusive contract between the superstar and the platform will trigger more exclusivity from the small firms, for the small developers, for the small artists, simply because they can enter the market and it is better for them to go on the dominant platform. Now, this is just to underline what happens when you have exclusivity or when you have a non-exclusivity. What is the optimal decision of the superstar? And this responds to the comment that Damien was making at the very beginning of his introduction. This will depend on whether the superstar cares about the audience. So if the superstar cares a lot about the audience, the superstar will prefer a non-exclusive contract. If the superstar instead cares a lot about how much she can make from the exclusive contract, then the superstar will prefer an exclusive contract. And more importantly, there exists a cutoff such that exclusivity emerge and non-exclusivity emerge if this network externality that the superstar has are larger. And what is interesting here is that this cutoff depends on some component, and this component, strictly speaking, tell us that when there is more intense competition in the market, a superstar will make many consumers moving from one market, from one platform to another, triggering more entry in the market, more exclusivity, more surplus generation, and therefore exclusivity will be more likely. And therefore this cutoff will go up. So if there is competition in the market, exclusivity becomes more likely. And this responds to Damien's comment. Now, is this exclusivity good or bad? Now, from the perspective of the small firms, this could be only good. The reason is that some firms under non-exclusivity do not enter the market. Under exclusivity, they enter the market, and therefore there is some surplus for them. But what about consumers? If we were in a traditional one-sided market in which consumers do not gain from any interaction with the small firms, so theta is equal to 0, consumers are always worse off when there is exclusivity. But if instead consumers care about the interaction with the small firms and vice versa, then consumer can gain if they really care a lot about the small firms, because they will care a lot about how many firms will enter the market. And so we can show that under some condition, exclusive contracts in two-sided markets can be welfare enhancing. Now, finally, let me say a few things regarding the vertical merger. Suppose now the superstar is vertically integrated with the platform. You can imagine, for instance, Sony entering the gaming production or Spotify acquiring some podcast producers. Now, the profit of the merged entity will take into account how much the downstream component, the platform component will get, but also how much the superstar component will get as well. And so the question here is whether the merged entity will prefer to be exclusive or to license the superstar contract to the superstar product to the rival platform. What we show here is that, again, if the merged entity cares a lot about the interactions with the consumers, the merged entity will prefer to license the contract, to license the product. Otherwise, exclusivity will be preferred. But as compared to a situation in which we have vertical separation, you can see here that exclusivity will arise less often. And the reason is that there is a way to soften competition by licensing the superstar content to the rival, especially because when you have a merged entity, you care a lot about the demand. And under exclusivity, you would prefer to price very aggressively. So this is a very important result that says that in two-sided markets, when there is a vertical merger, we need to be very careful about the presence of exclusivity and the effect of exclusivity. Now, we have several extensions that relax some of the assumptions that we make, looking at asymmetric platforms, more superstars, what would happen when you have a very dominant platform and you are close to tipping, what happens if you have multi-homing consumers, what happens when you can charge the firms, or you have elastic demand, and our results go through. So I can now summarize what are the main results here. What we show is that exclusivity in these markets, in two-sided markets, will arise when there is more competition. So it's competition that is driving exclusivity, and indirect network externalities are very important. So we should not overlook them, and they are important because they can make consumers benefiting from exclusivity if they really care a lot about the interaction with the other side of the market. They can make exclusivity less likely under vertical integration, and if there is no vertical integration, they can create more gains from exclusivity. There are 4 policy lessons that we can learn from this paper. First of all, we need to be careful when looking at two-sided markets. So theory of harm needs adaptation to two-sided markets because of these network effects that can generate different predictions. Banning exclusive deals, like some proposals made by some regulators also in China, may lead to unintended effects. Competition is the main driver of exclusivity, and we can see this in the music market, in the esport market. And finally, be careful when evaluating vertical mergers, because you might have less foreclosure if we want to consider exclusivity as a source of foreclosure. That's it. Thank you very much. And you can find the updated paper on the Social Science Research Network. And for any info, you can simply send me an email.
Hello. Thank you very much. So I have 2 comments on the paper that I found very interesting. So one is that it highlights the importance of feedback loops and indirect network effects on platform business models, and how important it is to understand those if we want to understand the incentives and the motivations of some of the platforms' conduct, rules, pricing decisions. So in any analysis of conduct, that seems to be the place to start. It's really understanding what is happening on the platform. So that is, I think, a very welcome point here, and essential that people internalize it. The other point that I found very valuable is illustrating how platforms adopt those rules and internalize those indirect effects and indirect externalities, network effects, to create value that actually reverts to everybody. So in this paper, both firms and users get value from, in fact, from this agglomeration effect and this activation of indirect network effects. And I think that is also a very good point to make, that that many of those activities and platform rules are value generating and need to be understood, and also that everybody benefits for that value. And that brings me a little bit to the policy discussion of that, because what we see is a little bit of that's a little bit the source of the conundrum that regulators and policymakers have, is what does that mean for the risk of entrenchment, that platforms suddenly kick in some network effects. Here in this paper is the agglomeration effect, which is the ability to almost replace the network effect with one player that kickstarts that phenomenon. So what does that mean for the danger of entrenchment, which could lead, even if legitimately acquired, could lead to abuse of and lack of entry and dynamic effects. And so the question is then, well, what do we know about entry in the platform space? Because it comes down to that in the end. If we accept that those activities and those platforms generate value, how worried we should be about entrenchment? And for that, I mean, I've been reviewing some papers at the diverse conferences that I've been lately, and basically you have a model for every story you want to tell, but there's some generalities, general considerations that appear, and is that generally entry for the analysis of entry, you tend to compare those. So the advantage that you generate with those network effects, agglomeration effects, indirect externalities, the advantage that the platform generates, how easy it is to replicate that so that users are attracted to an entrant, and how do you model user behavior faced with an entrant and an incumbent. And what we see is that depending how you model this, you can have the story that you wish to have. And most of the time, the assumptions model basically are the ones that define the outcome. But one thing that comes out is that you make those assumptions more realistic as you increase the number of platforms, you increase platform differentiation, you increase the dimensions of competition, the type of things that people want to see on the platforms that they value, and you increase the consumer heterogeneity. It's very difficult to bar entry. So tipping just doesn't happen in that world. And platforms, if they want to succeed, they have to work at it by providing ever more value. And that's a little bit my concluding point is, why is merit always excluded as an explanation of success in the regulatory debate? Why are high market shares never attributed to quality? And so I will leave it at that, because I think it's a big gap. I think we need to have a much more sophisticated value discussion in this environment. I will come down and say I very much welcome Mike's remark in the previous panel, saying, and I appreciate the fact that he says we know there's value being created, and that's good. And I very much like that he said, well, the exercise is to reflect how can we create even more value. We feel there's even more that could be done, or we could rearrange certain things to create more value. I think I very much welcome that discussion. I think that's a very constructive question. The only thing is that we need to do that without destroying the value that's already there. So that's the reflection we need to have. One last comment on the personalization debate, and I have to at least in one sentence reply to that. We are going to a world of personalization. It's not just ads, it's health, insurance, financial services, any service you can think of, leisure, it will be personalized. We are going towards a world of data. That is also a conversation that we need to have in the right space and in a way that is not instrumentalized.